Thank you very much. So again, if you would like to make a comment and you haven't already let me know, or you have a question and you haven't already put it in the chat, go ahead and do so now. You can also raise your hand and I will add you to the list. So the first person I have on our list is James Marion. You'll have 2 minutes and your time will start when you start speaking. You'll have to unmute, but you should have access. There you go. We're ready when you are. It looks like you're unmuted, but I'm not hearing you. Perhaps finding the mic and getting a little bit closer to it. There. The mic and get a little bit closer to it.
Okay.
I'll give you a minute to figure out the system and we can get back to you. Maybe we'll answer a question. We can get back to you. Okay. So we'll go on to our next person and I'll circle back to James Marion. So our next verbal comment would be from Christy Green. Go ahead and unmute.
Oh, hi, thank you for letting me speak. I'm from up here in Colorado, and the reason I wanted to tune into you is because I have a small nonprofit called Wild Aware, and we were working with CDOT and Colorado Parks and Wildlife closely, and we actually had an underpass identified and was on the short list for funding. And then Parks and Wildlife decided they didn't like the location. And so my question is, if you've had other technologies that you put to use when you were not able to use a pass, and in particular, I was also curious about your elk crossing signs. All we have are wildlife, kind of general wildlife crossings. We know they don't work very well, but I was wondering, general wildlife crossings, they don't work very well. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, whoever is breaking up. I don't know if you're hearing me, but I guess I'm checking in with you. First of all, I wanted to see if Patricia has worked with Colorado at all. Yeah, okay. And I thought maybe Patricia and Matt, I'd like to check in with you later, but mainly just to see in the locations where you see a corridor is important or your wildlife vehicle collision numbers are high, but you're not able to put in a pass. What sorts of measures are you able to pursue?
I could take that for the first few moments. Christy, what road are we talking about?
Evergreen lies west of Denver, and Colorado Highway 74 is the area we're talking about. It's about a 7-mile stretch with a fairly high number of elk roadkills because we have a resident herd, and that's another situation. I wonder if you have somewhere in New Mexico where you have a resident herd that sort of hangs out in the highway as much as they want.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Okay, I want to hear about that.
Places Mark can tell you more, but I've just gotten to the point of almost hitting them so many times in the dark. They literally do stand right in the road. Pagosa Springs on south, it's all one place to them. It's not two different states. Here's just a real quick, before we go into details. When you have an option or a driver warning system that detects an animal, that's one of the very few other mitigation measures that you can use. But here's all the things you need. You need a 2-lane road. You can't be any more. You need to be going 55 miles an hour or slower. You can't slow down in time. And your traffic volume has to be 2,000 vehicles per day or less. So if you don't have those 3 factors, you can't have a driver warning system. From there, I will let Mark and Matt tell you more about New Mexico, but Michelle Corderwin in Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and we can tell you more about her later. She's your champion. She helped us with, she was not just help, she helped create State Highway 9's wildlife crossing structures, and she's up there in the Steamboat Springs area. So yeah, I'll let the New Mexico folks speak.
So Christy, could you restate your question with regard to game and fish?
Yes, absolutely. We had identified a culvert that was considered to be acceptable as an underpass for the resident herd of elk, as well as mule deer, black bears, mountain lions, and whatnot. And unfortunately, Parks and Wildlife, for several reasons, decided that they would not approve the project. And so we still have this 7-mile stretch of highway. And I was wondering what other options that we might have to address the WBC problem, because it is actually, Patricia, it's a much larger road with higher speed limits, and it's absolutely not a candidate for your driver warning systems. And I know Michelle just got hired by Parks and Wildlife to work with CDOT on the issue, so I look forward to reaching out to her, but I don't want to take up all your time. Areas where you might have a resident herd, that you might have other options that work for you.
You know, in northern New Mexico, we have a lot of elk. We have migratory herds under certain weather conditions, and we have resident animals, and they tend to mix together. So it's not clear to me that anything else would work in that kind of a situation. You generally need overpasses or bridges large enough for a number of animals to go through a herd of elk, not just an occasional individual. And you need fencing. You need the 8-foot fencing to funnel them into it. Otherwise, they're generally not going to use it. So I guess I'd be curious why Colorado Department of Wildlife or Division of Wildlife, you know, did not want to implement that project if it's an ideal pre-existing crossing location, because it could potentially just take some fencing, you know, to encourage them to use it. You could always get end run events around the end of the fence. And for that, you'd probably want some kind of, you know, notification system, a detection system, or blinking lights to let drivers know that there's going to be end run events.
Right. Well, they had some issues about, there were some private property issues on one side, and also a public park. So there were some valid issues. It's just an area where elk gather. But I don't want to take your time today. I'd probably rather talk about your own state. But thank you for filling me in, and I look forward to maybe catching up with some of you later. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. And with that, we'll go to our next in line is a question that was in the chat. It says, aside from advocating for increased funding for infrastructure and habitat restoration projects, as well as increased agency staffing capacity, how can we help you all expedite projects and plan for many more in the future? Second part is, can you give us some guidance on the narratives for the comment period?
I guess I can probably start off with that one. You know, aside from funding, I mean, funding is definitely a huge part of this. But if you recall Mark talking about the Tijeras Canyon project earlier, you know, that was largely driven in part by a nonprofit coalition or a very organized group to actually push that project forward. And you know, I wasn't around during that time, but you know, I think that definitely played a big part in actually getting that done, was having some outside support for that. So we definitely look forward to working with a number of nonprofits and NGOs who are very interested in this effort by us. Let me read the rest of the question.
And while Matt's reading that, I just want to mention that Matt needs your assistance from the outside. He's your point man within the agency, and you know, there's like 3 biologists and, you know, 100 engineers. So by all means, give him the support he needs, and he'll do whatever he can. If he sounds like he's the only person interested in it, it will be a hard push.
You know, and I might add, having worked on the Tijeras Canyon Safe Passage project, the coalition, Tijeras Canyon Safe Passage Coalition, formed organically out of a meeting that we had to talk about what other Western states were doing implementing wildlife vehicle collision mitigation projects. And it really was not a coalition of conservation groups. It was a coalition formed primarily of residents on the east side of the Sandias. And many of them were commuting into Albuquerque on a daily basis and actually saw deer hit or hit deer or other animals, and basically felt like it was time to do something about it. And so that's sort of the vision I've had for how some of these projects can start rolling. And actually, Colorado has an organization called the Wildlife and Transportation Alliance, which I think is very beneficial because some of the nonprofit folks, conservation groups work on seeking funding and generating local support and maybe advertising and education. And that's not generally something that the agencies, either Matt's agency or my agency, really have authority to do or the people to do. So I think that's a real productive coalition that maybe we could try to replicate here in New Mexico.
Thanks, Mark. That's great. I also just want to add on a little bit. These projects that we're describing, they are definitely pretty massive in scope. But at the DOT, we will be looking for different opportunities to address at least portions of projects, with ongoing road projects. So if we can piggyback on a upcoming project, just to get a small phase of one of these priority projects done, then we'll definitely try to capitalize on that.
Thank you very much, Matt. Anything else from our panelists on that? Okay, go to the next question. If the NMDOT installs a wildlife crossing on private land, what role does the department have in maintaining fences, cattle guards, and other components of the wildlife crossings?
Yeah, sure. The DOT is in charge of maintaining all right-of-way fence across the state. That's just part of our jobs. And we have dozens of patrol yards across the states who are constantly looking for downed fence, and it's a very overwhelming job. I know some landowners probably get frustrated because the fence isn't, it might be in need of repair or replacement, and that is something that we do try to stay on top of. But these wildlife crossing projects definitely need to have functional fence to be successful in guiding wildlife to our crossings. So we will continue to maintain fence, and we will have patrols keep a special eye out for any gaps in these fences. The cattle guards that are associated with these game guards, they're basically like double wide cattle guards that deer can't jump over, or deer are less likely to jump over. Those are pretty long lived, but we were also stay on top of maintaining those as well. Did I answer all the questions?
I think so. And just as a reminder, if we do not address the question as you asked it, go ahead and let us know in the chat, and we can elaborate. Excellent. So next on my list is verbal comment from Marvin Mendelou. Go ahead and speak when you're ready after you unmute, and your time will start when you start speaking.
Mute. Okay, am I unmuted now? Can you hear me? Yeah. I was had a lot of questions regarding the Bernalillo area, the Sandia Mountains wildlife corridor. It didn't seem to me that it's a big issue there. I didn't think there was much wildlife running around except for the feral horses. So maybe you can tell me a little bit more, because I think you went very briefly over that particular area.
I can start off with that. There's certain situations in New Mexico where the highways are so wide and the traffic volume is so high that wildlife generally don't try to cross them. And certainly I-10 at Steins, down in the far southwest corner of the state, just above the Boot Heel, is one of those, where we've got sheep looking at each other basically across the highway, but they won't attempt to cross. I think that's very similar for I-25 from Albuquerque, you know, pretty much all the way to Santa Fe, and certainly for I-40. But there have been relatively recent collisions, certainly on Santa Ana Pueblo land with elk, and I think with mule deer. There's radio collar information, telemetry data that has been provided to us to use that shows where these animals are piling up next to the freeway. And in some cases, they will try and cross 550. And Santa Ana Pueblo has done a lot of research on that, Glenn Harper and his crew. And I think he's actually on the call tonight. So they would be much more knowledgeable about the specifics of that. But there are, you know, different data sources such as the crash data and the GPS collar data that indicate that animals want to cross the freeway, but are probably very hesitant to do so, except on rare occasions. And when that happens, oftentimes they get hit just because of the traffic volume. And certainly it's not hard to, you know, look back 100 years ago and recognize that animals probably traverse that country between the Jemez Mountains and the Sandias all the time. Black bears, cougars, mule deer, elk, potentially bighorn sheep, and it's essentially been cut off by freeways and traffic volume.
Well, that's what I meant. It seemed like there was very little, there might be corridors through San Felipe Pueblo to Santa Ana or something like that. I doubt if there's really any corridors at all, frankly.
Well, that's the point of constructing these overpasses and underpasses is to make them, you know, more desirable for different species of large game animals and other animals as well to use. Because,
Well,
you know, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. I'm sorry. I jumped. I tend to jump the gun, so to speak.
You know, we're dealing with highways where there's a lot of collisions with large game animals, and you know, that represents areas where the traffic volume may not be that high, but a lot of animals hang out near the roadway and the right of way. They cross during migration periods or their daily movements and oftentimes get hit. We're also dealing with other areas like I-10 at Steins and I-25 and I-40 in and around Albuquerque, Santa Fe area, where the traffic volume is so high that it's potentially cut off virtually all wildlife movement, except for occasional animals that may try to cross and make it across. Or, you know, one cougar was collared on Kirtland Air Force Base and actually went through a culvert at Sandia Pueblo. So some of the carnivores actually use these smaller existing culverts and manage to cross safely. And then other times, you know, they'll try to cross on the surface and sometimes they get hit.
Yeah, I see that. There used to be a lot of coyotes living in Albuquerque in the culverts and all that, but that's probably over. What I'm sort of curious about is the wild horses that around the Placitas area and on some of the pueblos. And I guess you don't deal with wild horses.
What? Well, those are basically feral horses. That's kind of a whole different issue. New Mexico Department of Game and Fish does not have authority over livestock or feral horses. New Mexico Department of Agriculture does. Wildlife is defined by statute in New Mexico Chapter 17 statute, which is, you know, how we define wildlife. And then the Wildlife Corridors Act defined wildlife its own way as far as what species we're supposed to focus on. And then we did develop the species of concern list, but feral horses are not something we considered.
Yeah, I assume that. I think, you know, it's with the livestock and all sorts of other departments and probably the legislatures in the counties. Well, I wish you luck with every inch of the planet is fenced. So I wish you luck on figuring out something. You know, there's a fence everywhere and the animals just look at the fence and don't know what to do.
Thank you very much, Marvin, for your comment. With that, we'll go to the next question.
Sandra,
It was-
this is Patty. I'm sorry to interrupt. Could I just show a map? Could I share my screen for a moment? It might help elucidate some things with everyone.
Sure.
All right. Oh, great. Thank you. Here we go. All right. I wanted to share with you some of the information that we use to make our decisions, just to show you as well that the linkages, the areas that are pretty large where animals need to move, they're not just based on modeling. And what you see here, I'm sharing my screen with you. So Albuquerque's down here. If you see the little cursor moving around, Interstate 25 goes north and then curves over to the east. These polygons here are the movement patterns of different animals that Glenn Harper and those in the Pueblo de Santa Ana put GPS collars on. Then south of the interstate here in the Sandia Mountains are the movements of a couple of mountain lions that were collared by University of New Mexico. So if you look at the blue hatching, this is kind of a fun, I would have loved to put it in a slideshow. This is a fun map that shows here's where mountain lions roam, are the blue. Mountain lions are amazing roamers. They can move 10, 20 miles in a night. And then on the Pueblo de Santa Ana, you can see all these different animals. The yellow are pronghorn, the red stripes are elk, and the blue are mule deer. And then there's a couple of black bear in there as well. The animals tell us where they need to move. The animals are showing us where they're bumping up on US 50 here and Interstate 25. And the pronghorn just stand there on the edge of the highway of that yellow there and look out. So again, it wasn't just modeling. And we may not see the animals. A lot of them move at night. Of course, we're not out there as much as the wildlife ecologists are, but they told us they need to get across these highways. And so we're very thankful for the Pueblo de Santa Ana to have done this to help us determine where the important places were. And then our other tribal friends will be helping us to put in structures with these two highways. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patty. Our next question was also in the chat. It says, how effective are lower speed limits and signage in reducing wildlife-related vehicular collisions?
That's a Matt
It's probably a
question.
Patty question, right? You know, there was a paper that just came out recently that said that there isn't too much of a effect on saving animals by lowering the speed limit, correct, Patty?
Yeah, it's all about people. That's why I work with wildlife. Animals are much easier to train than people. You can get people to slow down maybe 5 miles an hour from what studies have shown, and it's very hard to slow people down. Even like, just to give you an example, I'm like, there was a Florida Panther speed zone, cop was sitting there, somebody was speeding through it, he flashed his lights at the person, please slow down. They slowed down a little and they went and hit a panther. So this happens all over the place. Colorado DOT has zones up in the Gunnison area where they reduce the speed limit in the winter time when the animals come down for winter habitat. It's just, it's very hard to slow people down, as you probably know if you ever try to walk across the street as a pedestrian.
Thank you very much. Our next question, also written into the chat. Would someone speak to the overpass or overpasses identified as a need on New Mexico 38? Second part to the question, what does an overpass look like on the landscape?
You know, I did ground truthing for that project, and I don't know if the questioner is from that area, but if you are, you probably know that we've got lots of bighorn sheep that like to hang out on that highway. They might be hanging out on that highway right now, and they're literally in the road oftentimes. There's been a number of crashes with bighorn sheep there, and even one human fatality a few years ago from a motorcyclist hitting a herd of sheep. And, you know, there's probably various reasons why they hang out there. The grass is greener, early green up next to the roadway, salt on the road, that sort of thing. But that's where they like to hang out. And so when we ground truth that highway, basically all the way between Cuesta and Red River, you know, we look for cuts in the road where overpasses can go in, and it's very steep on both sides of the highway there. You've got the Red River on the south side, so that could be a limitation, but there's pretty high potential for overpasses at multiple locations, and that's generally what bighorn sheep will use. As Patty stated earlier, they won't generally use underpasses unless they're huge. And that road is basically in the bottom of the canyon. And so the existing culverts there are very small, nothing that large game animals will go through. So that's basically the option that we have there is 1 or 2 overpasses, and there's public land there, national forest land on both sides, and the mine is there, which could potentially be a partner. So we feel like we've got partnership opportunities and public land opportunities to build overpasses there if we can get funding and community support, which is an important component of the Wildlife Corridors Act, having community support. What those overpasses physically look like, I'm not expert enough to say because we so far haven't built one in New Mexico. But Patty, you want to take it?
Sure, I will love to share my screen again, and I'll go through a couple of different overpasses from different states, and you can get an idea. Sound good? All right, I'm going to try and share the screen again. Let's see here. I'm just seeing if I have permission to share yet. Share screen. There we go. Bring in the overpass. Cue the overpass. Okay. All right. What you will be seeing here in a moment, if you don't see it yet, is an overpass for desert bighorn sheep over US 93 in Arizona. And I put the measurements on there to give you an idea. Divided highway would never need to be that big up in the Cuesta area, but we might be doing something like this on I-10. 50 feet wide, 202 feet long, very open because the desert habitat is like that. Very simplistic. This is like the first overpass in the nation was in Utah. It's just like it. There you see it on the landscape.
Just to clarify, in case people can't really make it out, that is a natural substrate. It's not concrete, just so it kind of blends into the landscape a little better.
And the bighorn, the desert bighorn, were using it before it was finished. And a mama brought her baby across there that was only hours old. Lots of big boys, I call them big boys, rams go through it. Here, the next one is an overpass. This is an amazing picture. This is an overpass. It's not even done being built yet. It's in Nevada. The construction crew are there, and that mule deer's up there trying to get across. This is an amazing overpass over the interstate, which I'll get back to. It's huge. This is an overpass. Oh, that's you. So that's Montana on US 93 again, just 2 lanes. In Montana, north of Missoula, it can be quite small. And if we do something like this in Cuesta, it could be that overpass costs $1.8 million. This is that amazing overpass I just showed you where the mule deer couldn't wait. It's a pair of arches. And here's another set of overpasses in Nevada again. Oh, I guess I took a lot of pictures. This is US 93 again in Nevada. Just to give you an idea, they are usually brought in to match the landscape. And when you have a 2-lane road, in the past, we've been able to get these prefabbed arches in there for under $2 million. Here's the first overpass in North America, Utah. That's how that bridge idea came about over Interstate 15. And my camera showed a lot of mule deer going over it. And then this one is an overpass that was just built. Well, I'll go back. That one's built over Interstate 80 in Utah. Here's an overpass in Wyoming with pronghorn on it. Again, those are those pronghorn going over the overpass in Wyoming. And you got a pretty good idea there. So that's it.
Patty, how much was the Montana overpass? It was 1 point something.
Yeah, it's 1.8. So they're prefabbed arches from the Conspan arches from a company called Contact. They're made offsite and brought in. And when you have a 2-lane tight highway like that and the landscape's really close by, I don't know what it is now, but it was under 2 million. All those overpasses over 2 lanes were 2 million or less.
Excellent, thank you. Well, that was a very thorough explanation of what they might look like. That's great, I appreciate it. I'm pretty sure everyone is going to want to go back and look at the recording for that one, see it again. Okay, so we'll go on to our next question. Feel free to, again, if you have other questions, add them in the chat. If you want to make a comment, you can let me know in the chat or raise your hand. Our next question was written into the chat. It says, will wildlife will the wildlife fencing require a widening of the existing road easements?
I don't imagine any situation where that's going to be necessary. First of all, I just want to re-clarify that private landowners don't have to participate if they don't want to, and so there is not going to be any eminent domain or anything like associated like that. But I'm pretty sure our current right-of-way boundaries should be sufficient for fencing.
I've worked on all 10 projects in New Mexico, and most, if not all of them, include 8-foot woven wire game-proof fence, and all of those that I'm aware of have gone right on the right-of-way line. Sometimes it replaces the barbed wire, sometimes it's really close up against it. Occasionally, they may move it inside on the right-of-way closer to the pavement, just depending on slopes, but it's, as far as I know, there's never been a taking of private land to install game-proof fence in New Mexico.
Thank you very much. That will go on to the next question, also written in the chat. It states, what will the process look like in terms of working with landowners? It's kind of a three-part. What will outreach look like, and will conservation easements be required? So what does the process look like for landowners, which we kind of talked a little bit, the outreach, and will conservation easements be required?
So, these projects are most likely, for the most part, pretty far down the line. We haven't done a lot of private landowner outreach yet, but once we actually start getting to the design phase of these projects, and we actually need to pinpoint exactly where these crossing structures are going to be placed in the future, then that outreach process will kick off. Conservation easements, yes, no. So if we are retrofitting a existing structure, a culvert, something, just kind of tying a fence to it, conservation easements aren't really necessary. But if we're spending $7 million on a wildlife overpass, then it's absolutely necessary for private land. Yes. Did I hit all of that?
I'd just like to mention again, part of the Wildlife Corridors Act that I think has been overlooked because it's toward the end. Basically one of the requirements that the agencies are directed to do to fulfill the act is to work on projects that have basically local support and local consensus. And again, there is that stipulation that private landowners can participate voluntarily, and if they don't want to, they don't have to.
Okay. Anything else from our panelists on that one? Okay. Our next question was also in the chat. It states, what's the estimated cost of an overpass? We kind of touched about that, but maybe Patty would like to reiterate as the ones identified as a need on New Mexico 38.
All right, that's right in line with what we were saying. So an overpass gets more expensive as you add more lanes to a highway. 2-lane highways tucked in the mountains with a good amount of natural topography on either side could cost as little as $2 million. And by the way, when we talk about $2 million, one of my favorite quotes is decimal dust. If you look at I'm not sure what the New Mexico DOT's annual budget is, but $2 million is not it's typically not a big part of a project, believe it or not. But then when you start going to 8-lane highways, which you don't really have too much of that, then it become something like, just a generalization. Please don't say this is it, but I just realized an 8-lane highway that I showed you being built, the overpass being built outside of in Utah, outside of Salt Lake, was $8 million. So it's kind of interesting. Just really, really, really rough. Please, if you write this, put the words really, really. $1 million a lane. So 2 lanes, 2 million, 8 lanes, 8 million, and give you an idea. Now, if you're in Los Angeles and trying to cover over a dozen lanes and a frontage road, then you can go up to like, 75 million or so. But yeah, it can be fairly inexpensive on DOT terms, but you can't put a lot of them in because that is not necessarily what a DOT typically is doing out there.
Okay, thank you very much. I only have one more question that was in the chat. Does anyone else want to provide verbal comment? If you do, raise your hand or let me know in the chat. And then the last question I can place in the chat so everyone can see it.
And it looks like Jennifer had her hand up. Now it's down.
Okay, I just posted the question in the chat.
So human use of overpasses does not really mix well with being a dedicated wildlife overpass. I can't give you specifics on as to what extent the effect is, but it's something that we definitely want to try to avoid, kind of mixing those uses. So if we're building a wildlife dedicated overpass, we definitely want to be, dedicated to wildlife, not necessarily human access.
Thank you, Matt. And it looks like there's one more question posted in the chat.
Well, you guys read that. Let me just give you a little bit of background information. So most of you don't know me, but I research wildlife crossing structures throughout the West, in almost every Western state I've worked in. And we do have wildlife crossing structures on private land. And I actually have had cameras in for years at some of these culverts that were on private land, and very, very little of the public moving through those structures. Normally, the landowner gives the blessing of someone who might want to run a snowmobile through, or people that hike through, but we don't see really an increase because they're in places where there's not a lot of people. And it winds up that sometimes the private land is the best place to put a wildlife crossing structure because it keeps the public out. So it has not become a problem on private land. Private land winds up being some of the best places to put the crossing structures to keep the people out.
Okay. I think for clarification, it might be easier if I read the next question. So was added to the chat, and it says, using number 1 corridor, Chama as an example, please describe what is meant by will require much private landowner involvement, in quotes, from most to least impact. What measures will prevent trespassing on private property by public due to usage of public funding? And I will post this in the chat because it might be easier to read as well.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, by will require much private landowner involvement, that's just going to, have to be cooperation with private landowners and basically have their buy-in to want to participate in this type of project. If that doesn't work out for the landowner that owns the land where the crossing structure is suggested to be, then we'll have to go to Plan B and then Plan C possibly. So these conceptual projects that are provided in the plan are just what we thought at a kind of a field reconnaissance level, and just a kind of standing on the outside, what would be a good wildlife mitigation project. So we will be contacting landowners involved in these project areas to actually gain their support. Like I was saying earlier, that's further down the line once we actually start trying to design these projects. Trespass on property. public good. I mean, I think I'm reading the second part of that question right. But I mean, trespassing is illegal regardless of how the project was funded. So if I get some clarification either by a panelist or by Ms. Cordova, I appreciate it.
That's why I was mentioning, Matt, that where I've researched, we don't see an increase in people using structures. I'll have
Okay.
counted structures for years. And the fact that the land is privately owned actually helps keep people out as opposed to publicly owned lands. So
Right. Thank you,
by
Pat.
virtue of the fact that it's privately owned, people are still reticent to use a structure. If you've had problems in the past with ATVs and snowmobilers, you might continue to have some, but it doesn't typically bring the people to the area.
And I would add, as an example, if you have one or two landowners on both sides of the highway, that's a potential good overpass location, and both of those landowners are participants and stakeholders and partners in the effort to build the overpass. These overpasses and underpasses need the 8-foot game fence to funnel animals to those. So the fence itself is not going to stop, close to these structures. It continues on, and generally we try to tie it into a cliff face or another bridge so you don't get end run events by animals onto the highway. So the additional fencing, the high fence, could actually help protect private lands from trespassing, particularly in the situation of an overpass that people can't really access without scaling the 8-foot fence.
Thank you. Next question. Has all research that has been done to collect this data only focused on those areas mentioned? What about areas along I-40 from Laguna, New Mexico to Gallup, New Mexico? What is the Continental Divide landscaped?
So that kind of depends on what research you're talking about specifically. From a wildlife vehicle collision standpoint, our database is statewide collision data. And so when we did the hotspot analysis, it was looking across the entire state at problematic areas that have exceptionally high rates of wildlife vehicle collisions. So yes, we did look at all state roads. I want to specify that all state roads across New Mexico. I don't want to take Game and Fish's thunder or anything, so I'll let Mark elaborate. But there, Game and Fish is still putting out GPS collar data on animals to collect more movement data, and that could be incorporated in the future. As I was saying, I think earlier in the presentation, we do have the opportunity to update this plan on an annual basis. We aren't required to, but we do have that opportunity. And if Mark wants to elaborate on color data or collecting more science, I'll let him do that.
Well, I would just add that the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish big game program biologists get funding through Secretarial Order 3362 that was mentioned earlier, which was a national initiative to give states, state wildlife agencies funding to buy GPS collars to track animals, to see where migratory movements occur, and to try and protect those lands to continue to have these migrational movements. And as a requirement for getting that funding was to put into place another action plan, the Secretarial Order 3362 action plan. So our wildlife biologists, our big game biologists did that, and that Secretarial Order 3362 action plan identifies primary landscapes within the state, core landscapes within the state that are priority for us. They're actually called priority landscapes. And, those tend to align with some of our selections for the wildlife corridors. Certainly the Chama area is a priority landscape area for us with our Secretarial Order 3362 action plan. US 285, Tres Piedras, the Taos Plateau is also and so is the pronghorn triangle. So they're focused on putting out more collars in those priority areas because we've just started collecting GPS collar movement data within the last 3, 4, 5 years. And we don't know that much about migratory movements of animals in the state, certainly in southern New Mexico, where we could have elevational migrations. So that's the focus for Game and Fish. But for this Wildlife Corridors Act effort, as we've mentioned, we partnered with tribes that have also put out GPS collars and provided their movement data to us, and other independent researchers associated with New Mexico State University, with Furman University and others that have put collars out in other areas. For example, Dr. Jimmy Kane with New Mexico State University has collars out on, I think, 4 of the 6 species are priority species in the Jemez. And so that was part of this effort also. You know, you mentioned the area around, I think, Laguna Pueblo, and, you know, any kind of tribal land interests, you know, the tribes manage their own wildlife, so that's not generally something the Department of Game and Fish would do, but the tribes might be doing that, or the Pueblos.
Thanks, Mark. That was great. I wanted to show a map from the Wildlife Corridors Action Plan, page 162. If you go into the act, this shows you where our wildlife vehicle collision crash hotspots were throughout the state and regardless of the top 5. So this shows you the hottest colors are the most intense crash locations. The top 25 are numbered, but then things that are of a yellow-green color were not numbered, but they are up there. So if you have a particular area that you're concerned about, you can take a look at this map and see what the numbers say. Now, we know that crash data don't tell you the whole problem. For instance, truckers, people that drive 18-wheelers, particularly on these interstates, they do not report their crashes. So they could kill 14, 15, 20 animals at a time and just keep going. So the crash data is imperfect, but it's the only data that's collected systematically across the whole state and actually across the whole country to be able to compare and contrast places. So that's what we had to use to try and understand where our hotspot problems, but I can assure you, we don't know the full extent of Interstate 40. So if you in New Mexico choose to collect carcass data in some form or have a carcass collection system for I-40, you might be able to better identify the problem. But that was what we used for the crash analysis, and that wasn't the best. And we also did the linkage modeling. But animals typically move in these models from one common ecosystem to another. And it's hard. We did find that there was some potential for wildlife to cross west of Albuquerque, from the Gila up, I don't know, I'm not sure, in the Los Alamos area there, but that was theoretical. So this just shows you what we do know is happening on the landscape, and we didn't really have that much that we're aware of in the Gallup and I-40 area down out to Albuquerque.
I do want to expand on that just a little bit. If Patty can keep that map up, you know, we are keeping this map in mind, you know, even if an area didn't make our top 5 or top 10 collision hotspot list. You know, now that we've performed this analysis and gone through all these steps of crunching these numbers and everything, we know where problematic areas are. So if the opportunity presents itself to try to address one of these areas that we do know is problematic, then, you know, we'll you know, jump on that chance. You know, the options are still on the table.
And I would add to that Patty identified the top 60 wildlife vehicle collision hotspots in the state. So there's lots of opportunity out there to continue, you know, coming up with solutions for all these different hotspots. But, you know, if you look at an overall map, if you pile all the data of collision localities based on the accident report data on the map's completely covered. You can hit a large game animal anywhere in the state. So fencing the entire state is obviously not something we want to do. It has to be focused and localized, and enhance wildlife movement while increasing driver safety. But, you know, we want to do it in a organized, methodical method, but there's lots of opportunities out there well into the future to address these problems.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question states, how will you keep livestock off passes, particularly if landowners on one is different from a parcel across the pass?
That is a very good question, and actually something that we've learned from a trial and error in the past. You know, there have been issues or circumstances where landowners did want to keep, you know, their cattle from passing through a underpass that was enlarged for wildlife or that was designed for wildlife passage. In those cases, we can, you know, on the right of way fence line, the edge of the right of way where the fence used to be once upon a time, we can build a wildlife friendly fence, and that usually involves you know, a few strands or a gap at the bottom that's enough for, you know, if it's for pronghorn, they can crawl under, you know, a deer or duck can usually jump over. So there's different ways that you can modify the fence to allow wildlife to go through it, but still keep livestock from passing through.
Excellent. And right now, the last question on my list states, is your data from nm.roadkill data only, is your data from nm.roadkill data only, or do you use State Patrol crash data as well?
So the DOT has a database of collision data. You know, it's not just with wildlife, but, you know, all reported collisions across the state. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that is from numerous different sources, you know, both local, county, and state level police.
State police and sheriff's departments. I think there's a standardized accident report form that they use.
I do want to also mention that the crash data reporting forms are fabulous in New Mexico. You can be proud that your Department of Public Safety and New Mexico DOT have allowed for species pull down menus so that the reporting officer can tell us or DOT what animal was killed, which really helps with the mitigation solution. So you've got an area with mule deer, you can get them under the road much easier than you could with getting elk underneath, or bighorn, or et cetera. But mule deer and elk are your main two animals that you have the most crashes with. But sometimes in areas there's some cows on the road. And so it's good to know what's going on out there, and your crash data has that information. And the Wildlife Corridors Action Plan has maps of every single one of the 6 species that are the focal species. We know exactly where they're getting killed because of that great crash data you have.
Thank you very much. Last call for questions. If you have additional questions or comments that come up after this meeting, you can go to the website, which I will post right now, and you can post those. There's also an email that we had up, and I can post that again into the chat, unless someone else is faster at getting it in there. Okay.
Sandra, I do see a question from James Marion. Are there laws to protect wildlife within a certain number of feet so hunters just don't stake these areas out? Did you didn't read that one, did you?
I don't
No.
think that I have that one.
I would answer a short yes. It's illegal to shoot from a roadway.
Great. All right. Thank you for that one. I appreciate that. Keeping track of all of them definitely is better with a team. Okay. With that, if there's anything that we did not, and thank you, Matt, for posting the website and the email address. So now you have the website as well as the email. And thank you all for attending. Thank you to our panelists for the great presentation and summarizing a very, very detailed report into as concise information as you can. And with that, I hope that everyone has a great evening.